Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special panel discussion on the importance of mental health for a sustainable development and future of society. This discussion is organized by the library in conjunction with the fortunate visitation by these highly esteemed guests. The distinguished panelists for today's discussions are Dr. Maysa Akbar, a groundbreaking psychologist, best-selling author, and a healer. Dr. Jaipal, main representative of the American Psychological Association at the United Nations. Mr. Geoff Streat, Chief Operating Officer at Usher's New Look. And Geshe Lhakdor, respected Director of LTWA. We are delighted to have you here. May I ask Geshe Lhakdor to kindly make an opening remark?
Some days back, we have been writing back and forth, and they had a plan to come to Dharamsala, during which they also expressed a wish to see me, because His Holiness was then in Ladakh. Then I suggested that instead of meeting me personally, if we do a panel discussion, which will also be physical and online, that way it will benefit many people. As the panelists will be introduced later on, they are highly qualified scholars, practitioners in their respective field, with the special aim of how to heal the suffering globe and make this healing process a sustainable one. So therefore I'm very, very delighted that you came all the way to Dharamsala. Not only that you supported my idea, and now you are here, personally present, and ready to share this wisdom. Since some time, the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives has been organizing many such talks, conferences, discussions, and we make it both physical and online. Sometimes when we organize a physical talk, the attendance may be 5 people. But we never get discouraged by that, because we know this is now the internet time, so many are watching online. And more than that, we record all the proceedings so that this is available for anybody who is interested later on. So therefore, I'm definite that this brief meeting will benefit many people, or at least bring more awareness among the people. Much of the suffering that we are encountering today in this world is lack of awareness, number one, and second, lack of implementation, that we are not ready to move. So therefore, I'm looking forward for all your presentation.
Presentation, I would like to request Dr. Jaipal to formally introduce the panel and the speakers.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's a real honor to be here and be invited by Geshe Lhakdor to do a panel on our work. So it's been very grateful, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be with all of you. We're very honored. So what we went back and forth with Geshe Lhakdor is what the panel should be about. So the panel is on the importance, as we said, of mental health for sustainable development and the future of society. And this is because, the UN passed this in 2015, the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals. And what we psychologists at the UN feel is that mental health is at the heart of sustainable development. There's no point having economic prosperity if people are breaking down and are mentally ill, and which we were finding in developed countries there's a lot of mental problems, a lot of mental health problems. So how do you build a society that's sustainable if you have mental health problems? And so we're trying to say that it is mental health and physical health is at the heart of sustainable development. And that we need to create environments, social, cultural, economic environments, as well as, of course, the environment. But we need to create these environments when we try to shape our policies or our institutions, our cultural, our cultural values, our educational institutions. We need to create ones that will create and facilitate and sustain mental health and happiness and how people can live in this world with each other. So this is the idea behind why psychologists are at the UN and why we feel so strongly about this topic. And so my name is Rashmi Jaipal, and I'm a cross-cultural and clinical psychologist. I taught cross-cultural psychology, which it's a discipline many people may not have heard of, but it's a very important discipline now in our time. So I taught psychological differences between cultures for many years in the US and represented the American Psychological Association and a group of psychology coalitions at the UN, where, again, we promote the importance of including psychology in creating policies for sustainable development. So that's what we're doing now. And I also did a Fulbright project in Sikkim a few years ago on youth suicide prevention, because unfortunately the rates were quite high here in India, and capacity building for counselors and laying down mental health systems, which is very important now in India. We're facing all these problems. We really need it here. So I'll be talking about that and the research I did on the psychological costs of communications technology and social media on youth globally. And so now I'm also very, very pleased and privileged to have with me two stellar professionals, Dr. Maysa from the US, Dr. Maysa Akbar, and Jeffrey Streat. Dr. Maysa Akbar is a board-certified clinical psychologist who specializes in child and adolescent psychology, and is presently the Chief Diversity Officer and head of the Public Interest Directorate Office of the APA, the American Psychological Association, which is the largest psychology organization of professionals, association of psychology professionals in the world, and is also very influential. It's considered the gold standard of psychology for psychology around the world. So she's the very senior in the APA, and she is known for her groundbreaking work on urban trauma and is an expert on racial trauma, allyship, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is a best-selling author of 2 books, Urban Trauma and also Beyond Ally, The Pursuit of Racial Justice with Wisdom and Compassion. So she by the way, also holds an assistant clinical professor position at Yale University and the School of Medicine, and is also the founder of Integrated Wellness Group, which specializes in the treatment of racial trauma, which is quite unusual. You don't have many of those. So she's a powerhouse in the world of psychology. And we also have Jeffrey Streat, another powerhouse in the world of education. He is an educationist, an MBA, and the CEO of an organization called Usher's New Look, which is a very innovative educational program to empower marginalized youth. Usher's New Look has been dedicated to uplifting, empowering, and transforming the lives of underserved youth around the world. It mobilizes communities, even in the private, and correct me if I'm wrong, private and public sector, to work together around the issues of community empowerment, youth development, and economic disparities. Really important work here. So we're going to be talking, each of us, about the work we do, so that you'll learn more about each of our work, and then we'll hand it over to Geshe Lhakdor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaipal. So Geshe Lhakdor, as we all know, has been a translator to His Holiness for 16 years, and he has experienced more of a treasure trove of experience and wisdom. So our first panelist, Dr. Maysa Akbar, she will talk on the topic in relation to her field, which is urban trauma and also interactional effects. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to present the talk.
Hello, thank you so much, and I am very excited to be here and honored to be here. As Dr. Jaipal said, I'm a pretty busy woman, and it's interesting how she said to me, "You should come and visit India. It's beautiful. Take some time off of work and come." And I guess when Geshe Lhakdor speaks, then your vacation turns into a panel discussion. So I'm still very honored to be here and share my time with you, and I know you're sharing your time with me. I want to be able to frame a little bit of our talk today and to share with you what I think was a very dynamic discussion that happened with two very dynamic people. When we think about how we're going to impact change, how each person, each individual in this room can exercise their passion for the things that are important to them, whether it's humanity, society, community, making the world a better place, more loving, compassionate, full of joy and love, to figure out a way that we can live in peace and exist with one another. It's complicated, right? If we knew how to do it, we would have done it already, I would hope. And I think that many of us work very hard to try to figure out how we can make a significant contribution to making the world a better place. So some of what I'm going to talk about is my early work and how I got to my current position and the type of work that I do. So I'm going to be very broad and systemic in my conversation. Then I'll pass it to Dr. Jaipal, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we would consider the concepts or frameworks related to population health or health equity. What happens to the health of every citizen when it's impacted by multiple dynamics that can be dysfunctional or chaotic and dysregulate us in our mental states as we exist and we coexist collaboratively with one another. And then Geoff will talk about what are some grassroots level approaches in terms of systemic change. We can spend a lot of time on ideas, but if we don't trickle it down to the communities that are most affected, then we're really not going to effectuate any type of change. And I know that that we're going to have a dynamic time and dynamic discussion. So I'll start with my work. I am the child of immigrant parents. I was born in the Dominican Republic, which is an island, the second biggest island in the Caribbean Sea. My island shares, it's split into two parts of the island. One part is Haiti, one part is the Dominican Republic. And if you look at history, and I can tell being here how much history is so important to the understanding of future generations, we were the first to abolish Western slavery in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of rich history in my island. And I like to say that I come from a generation of warrior women who were both warriors and broken all at the same time. And I say this because while my women ancestors taught me quite a bit about how to be resilient, they did that in spite of their own well-being. And I think that many times, depending on the situations that we were and the atrocities that were happening around us and how complicated our family histories are, we survived, but we survived with a lot of pain and a lot of struggle. And in this conversation, what we're trying to talk about is how do we start to create whole people who can look at struggle in a very different way and take care of the mental and emotional health. So by way of that, that history, the family history of my ancestors, my great-great-grandmother was the first to work in a plantation field. She was an enslaved woman and worked in a plantation field and was abandoned by her mother. And then my great-great-grandmother then abandoned my grandmother, who was sold to indentured servitude, who then abandoned my mother, who only had a 6th grade education, who later went on to abandon me as I was a young girl. And so part of what was important to me in my lived experience, and this is the first part that I'm going to talk about, is how to break generational cycles of trauma. Because I saw it this way. Either I continue to pass down abandonment and trauma to my children, or I make a decision to figure out how that history has impacted me and interrupt that so that my children would never, or hopefully closely, not have to experience abandonment and mental and emotional disruption in their lives. So I dedicated my life to studying intergenerational trauma and studying racial trauma and understanding how to do it, because I wanted to be a catalyst of change for my family, and perhaps I could also have been a catalyst of change for many other families to come. And so I like to say that my work is a combination of who I am as a person, Maysa, and who I am as a professional, all those nice things that Dr. Jaipal said about me, right? And so I took a long time to develop a concept, over a decade, called urban trauma, which was my first book. And it looked at 3 major elements that have to be at play. You know, we had to look at some of the historical components of how intergenerational and historical trauma is passed down. We have to look at the current environment of oppression that happens when communities are still under attack and brutally, either oppressed or marginalized. And then we have to think about, how does that show itself in our mental health, in our physical health, and in the way that we show up with our community. And so this concept has helped to enlighten many people to understand the question a little bit different. Instead of what's wrong with me, what learning about urban trauma has done to people is to ask, what happened to me? And that's a very different question, because what's wrong with me says that you're pathologized, that you're broken, that something's wrong with you, that you don't belong. When you ask the question, what happened to you, then you understand that there are forces outside of you that may have caused you to experience some of the things that you're experiencing. So one of the messages that I want to leave with this audience as I'm talking about it is, never exclude your lived experiences from the work that you do. They live and they coexist in one. And the beauty of that is that you can bring your full self to the work that you do. You don't have to leave one behind to be an incredible scholar and academic, and you don't have to exclude being a scholar and academic so that you can show up as your authentic self. You can both be authentic and also be the richness of who you are and how you show up in the field or the thing that you study. And so that's my part 1 of how my work got started. Then my part 2, this question that I started to ask myself, great, I developed this theory, people talked about it, they learned about it, they feel more aware. And the question that I had to ask myself is, so what, Maysa? What are you going to do now? What does it matter that you have this lived experience? What does it matter that you went through a very treacherous, process to be a scholar in this area if you're not going to actually effectuate any change? And so, as the world may have it, the universe and manifestation maybe of perhaps my unconscious, I was afforded the opportunity to take an executive position at the American Psychological Association. And the first task that I received was to think about how psychology can be uniquely positioned to dismantle systemic and structural racism. I was like, oh, thank you, that's my day one. I'll get that done, and then I'll go ahead and solve world peace in just one day. You know, that was my welcome package and then they told me about my benefits. So, you know, so I've been there for a couple of years now. I don't know that I've solved that problem yet. I'm still working on it. But I will tell you some of the big things that I'll do in closing my part of this conversation. I started to have to think about, okay, so can psychology be can make a unique contribution to dismantling systemic racism? I don't know. Well, here are some of the questions that I asked myself. Well, who or what or how is racism, perpetuated in our society? Well, mostly by people who build structures that then keep that going, right? Oppression and marginalization and et cetera. And so if psychology and psychologists are the experts in human behavior, then sure, why not tackle that, right? And why not that be one of the most important things that psychology is focused on? And one of the things that I found when I first started my position is that if I went around the room and I asked every one of my psychology colleagues, well, how do you define racism? Each one would have a different definition. And so then I said to myself, well, how can we dismantle something that we don't have a common definition for? We'll all be working towards something different. First, we have to establish a common definition. And so I went ahead and did that. And in the beginning of my position, we established a resolution that identified a uniform definition of racism that looked at racism in 4 levels: interpersonal, between you and I, how I can be racist or you can be racist towards me; institutional, so it lives in an institution, in the walls of an institution; systemic and structural racism, but also racism that focuses on the internalized way that we see ourselves. See, sometimes we hear so much that we are one way or another that we begin to believe it. And when we believe it, we behave in that way. And so there were so many levels that had to be looked at. Part of what the association needed to focus on is that the systemic and structural change. And so what we've done and where we're going is that we have created a pathway to develop racial equity, because you can't dismantle something without building another at the same time. A lot of people talk about dismantling, but not enough people talk about how to positively build structures that replace what was there. And so we are working on what's called a racial equity plan and psychology's positioning around how to create equity. And the last thing that I'll say before I pass this on is that, you know, we can talk a lot about something. I mean, people talk and talk and talk and talk sometimes until you're blue in the face. But until you put things in action, then that talk doesn't materialize into moments of opportunity for change. So in the last few weeks, just before I actually came here, when I was at the peak of my burnout, we seeded $1.1 million in a racial equity fund that will now be positioned to live in perpetuity forever. It will outlive me and everyone else that's there, and it will continue to contribute money towards creating racial equity. I wanted to make sure that we were putting dollars and funds into something that we said we were committed to, because without that, then it's just a lot of conversation. So those are the areas that I wanted to share with you in terms of the progression of how we see systemic conversations around mental health and trauma, and some of the areas of my work that I'm trying to effectuate change in.
This is really, yes.
Akbar, for the captivating talk. Next, we have Dr. Rashmi Jaipal to speak on the integration of indigenous approach towards mental health.
Sorry, that's okay. Go ahead.
You say whatever.
Yeah. Sorry, I
Thank you.
changed my talk at the last minute, so it's no longer what you were saying.
Besides, she already explained, so thank you.
So I found your talk fascinating, and this is an example of how we build sustainable systems. How we build a sustainable environment in the social sphere and in the systemic sphere. What you're doing with the American Psychological Association, this can have a real impact, in the real world, and really impact communities in the U.S., but then also it's a global organization. So it's very exciting to hear, and also that you're talking about long-term planning, and also as you were saying, to integrate one's own life experience into our work. So I was going to follow her lead and say that my own interest in cross-cultural psychology came because as I was growing up, I lived in many different countries because of my father's job, so I became very, very aware of the cultural differences and deeper differences in the way people functioned at the psychological level. So then I went on and studied psychology and then cross-cultural psychology. So I'm going to talk now about mental health. As she was saying, she's talking about the systems, but now we're going to move to the population level mental health issues, because there have been some alarming trends in recent years, especially for youth. So, and by the way, please forgive me for reading my aging brain. I don't remember, I can't, like these people talk spontaneously, I'll forget half of what I'm saying. But for basically for India and developing countries, the central issue is this development, particularly sustainable development, right? That's been the ongoing focus. And rapid economic and cultural globalization, we've seen this in India and elsewhere in the developing world, through technological innovations, particularly communications technology, like the internet and social media, is driving development and seems to have brought about many benefits to the developing world, but there also seem to be some costs associated with it, especially related to youth mental health. And that's what I want to talk about, because that's, again, the kind of systems we put in place, economic systems of mass marketing technology and using it to drive development, that is also having harm. I mean, it's benefiting, but it's also having some harmful effects. So, and especially if mental health is at the heart of sustainable development, then can we say that the problems of youth, the increase in youth mental health problems, is the canary in the tunnel? It's a signal that something is not working, something is really not right here in the way the world is continuing, with globalization. So according to, just give you some, the World Health Organization, I'm sure you're probably aware of it, there's an increase in youth mental health problems and suicide. That really bothers me. Youth suicide is increasing globally. And this seems to coincide with rapid development. So global increases in youth mental health problems, like the rates of anxiety and depression, have risen 70% in the past 25 years in the UK, and UK Good Childhood Report has found 10 to 15-year-old girls, they do studies every 5 years, massive 40,000 household surveys, where they find that 10 to 15-year-old girls are getting more and more miserable every 5 years. Earlier, they're getting more unhappy with their lives and with their appearance, reporting feeling ugly or worthless. And this is a trend you're seeing every 5 years they do this. The World Health Organization had a major report some years ago on suicide, where they're saying suicide is the second leading cause of death globally for young adults. And lower and middle income countries in Southeast Asia region, including India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, have the highest rates of youth suicide in the world. So again, how is this, what is happening here? So the high income countries, of course, also have very high, the suicide rate has increased to the highest levels in nearly 30 years. This was a 2014 US suicide study. So this is because now there seem to be new risk factors for mental health with the new technological and economic environment of globalization that we've created. It seems to be bringing about new risk factors, new kinds of mental health problems. why are these rising rates of youth mental health problems and suicide, and is particularly in our area of the world. It seems to coincide with this rapid development and unprecedented levels of cultural contact, which, for example, through widespread use of communications technology and social media, and that's one risk factor, which I'll go into, but the other one is acculturation stress from the pressure to assimilate to the spread of consumer culture. So that's also very interesting now. It's a kind of new risk factor. So there are, of course, many complex reasons for mental health problems, but these seem to be two new factors coming in that are increasing and exacerbating the already existing problems. So there's been, in terms of the first risk factor of the widespread use of communications technology, there's been a remarkable increase in internet uses from only less than 1% in 1995 to approximately 48% of total world population today, and now even more. So over 3 billion people are active internet users and so on. I mean, I won't get into all that, but at least 7.5 million social media users are under the age of 13, despite having to be age 13 or over to hold an account. Social media has shaped their entire lives. New risks facing young people specific to social media use are a distorted view of reality, sexting, revenge porn, this is more in the Western world, cyberbullying, privacy issues, gambling, access to inappropriate content, and so on. So there's a lot here, there's more as well. There's a growing body of research that also it affects the kids' cognitive and social functioning for children and adolescents. The effects on cognitive functioning show that using this, the more you use cell phones, texting, internet, social media, etc., it's associated with poorer memory in children. Children are supposed to have sharp brains are developing, and they're supposed to be developing well with good memories. They have associated poorer memories, faster and less accurate responding, poorer cognitive performance in school, delayed bedtime, shorter sleep time in school children. This leads to many cognitive deficits. And in addition, sleep deprivation, the effects on mental health in children, leads long-term to insomnia. Symptoms are associated with the use of alcohol, drugs, depression, suicide ideation, and suicide attempts. So in fact, insomnia during adolescence was a significant risk factor for depression in young adulthood. So it has consequences further down the line. If you're a teenager, by the time you're young adulthood, you're heading into depression. It also erodes self-confidence. From social media use, surveys found that half of the users felt inadequate and unattractive, associated with depression and anxiety. Facebook use significantly related to decreases in well-being, especially for women, and groups with low education and low income. And also effects on mental health, as we said, increased rates of anxiety. Social media usage leads to increased rates of anxiety, depression, and poor sleep. So should we be concerned at this point? Well, these trends that were in the developed countries, all of this research is in the developed world, the US, North America, Australia, New Zealand, that kind of thing. These trends are spreading to developing countries and are fast becoming global trends. So the issue is now, by the way, a very important mental health issue is cyber addiction. So internet addiction has become a real problem for especially young people. Its prevalence varies widely, but India has the second largest base of internet users, and overall they're finding that the addiction problem in India is real among adolescents, and at least 25% of adolescents have problematic internet use or internet addiction disorder, as it's defined in psychology. So I'll skip some of this because there's a lot, but overall, the negative health effects of internet addiction are, again, poorer memory and cognitive functioning, lower brain gray matter density in parts of the left brain, sleep deprivation, excessive daytime sleepiness, teeth grinding, nightmares. Again, it's affecting their social work, their social relations and academic work. I just had a conversation with one of the son of someone who's a cleaning lady in Delhi, and she was saying he's dropped out of school. He's a very bright boy, and she said for 2 years now he hasn't been attending school. So we were trying to find out why, and he said, no, I don't know. And then it turns out he's on the cell phone most of the time. And so then I asked the mother, what is his sleep like? She said, oh, he stays up very late on the cell phone. So I said, this sounds like internet addiction. And then when we were talking to him, he said, yes, well, I said, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, do you reach for your phone? Yes. The last thing at night, yes. And so this is what the effects of this is, that they begin to lose interest in other things outside the addictive screen that they're looking at. So he actually dropped out of school. So we're now trying to get him back. But I mean, these are real problems. Okay, so I better stop now. So I'll stop, and then in the discussion we can come back. But I feel passionately about this, which is why I go on about it. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaipal. That was so informative. And then next we have Streat, sir. So I'll leave to him to introduce and carry on with his.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a privilege to share a stage with the scholars up here. Can we have a round of applause for our guests? So I'm Geoff Streat. I'm with Usher's New Look, and I'm just so honored and happy to be here. It's been an amazing experience being here, taking in the sights and culture. Geshe, Lhakdor, thank you so much for the invite and being able to share space with you as well. I want to take a little bit different approach, and I feel so privileged to be a part of this team, and Dr. Akbar kind of set the table for our discussion today in talking about the systems level approach. And Dr. Rashmi has given us some very pertinent information about some of the things that are affecting our young people adversely. Some issues that we really have to pay close attention to, because it's really creating a deficit and driving a wedge between our young people and their productivity and their ability to be happy and whole beings. My work largely has been about bridge building. I know that the title that was mentioned in my introduction was Chief Operating Officer of Usher's New Look, but I think a more fitting description is bridge builder. And I love that analogy in that I really get great pleasure out of service and standing in the gap. Okay, and I wanted to really elevate that concept of standing in the gap. I think one of the things that struck me most about some of the learnings that the Dalai Lama has shared with us, in the museum across the street, there was a portion that was 108 questions asked of the Dalai Lama. And I spent quite an amount of time really reading those responses, those thoughtful responses, those brilliant responses. And a couple of things that really jumped out to me were each person taking seriously our responsibility to each other and the communities in which we live, right? That's a big piece of what standing in the gap is all about, right? Dr. Akbar and Dr. Rashmi have outlined some pretty serious issues that are afflicting us, right? But we don't often talk about how young people can be the solution to those critical issues, right? There's a famous song called The Greatest Love of All, really made popular by the late Whitney Houston. And my acoustics are not really right here because I would sing the song for you, but I just don't feel like my acoustics are proper right now. So, but it said, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty that they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. So I just want to sit with those words for a moment, and I want you to think about what that means. The children are our future, right? They are the future leaders of the world. If our children are not happy and whole, what does that mean for our communities across the world? The Maasai people in Africa have a greeting when you meet someone. The question is, and how are the children? The response in a perfect society are, and the children are well. Again, we have to center the power and the health of our young people. Now, a lot of my work spans across several different topics. My particular focus today is really leaning into some of the mental health aspects of the work, because that's a piece of the puzzle. We can't think about these things in isolation, right? Everything is connected, as the Dalai Lama says. There's connection, right? We have to understand the connection of everything. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions before I talk a little bit about the work, okay? So if you could, I will acknowledge that I hit the 50-year mark a couple of weeks ago, all right? So I'm 50. That's a groundbreaking milestone in life. But if we could all go back to our childhood years, or maybe even our teenage years, and raise your hand if you knew as a child or a teenager what you wanted to be in life. Okay, we have a couple of hands, right? Raise your hand if you knew how to navigate higher education. Okay, we got some high achievers there. Raise your hand if you knew how financial literacy or wellness worked. Lastly, raise your hand if you knew about mental health and wellness. So we're going to have to bring you up on the stage, brother, because I think you had all the answers. So I'm starting with those questions because, and excuse me, as a 50-year-old, I'm getting hot flashes sometimes, and my glasses are fogging up. So I'm going to remove my glasses for a moment. But those are really complex questions I just asked, right? Well, I think part of what we as adults don't always consider is we are asking our young people to come up with adult solutions and complex solutions on their own and without guidance in many cases. And that's just not the way to proceed in a healthy format, right? We want to make sure, let's just think about the pressures that come with those decisions, because some of those decisions to a large extent determine where you go in life, right? Your level of education sometimes determines your altitude, the wellness of your family, or the vitality of your family. So those are very important decisions that require careful consideration, support, right, to come up with solutions that really fit you. So Dr. Akbar talked about being able to go in spaces and be your authentic self, right? I think that's something that we should all strive to be, right? I saw another question where the Dalai Lama talked about inner peace. That's a really important thing to think about. We need to center more. And Dr. Rashmi, we talked a lot about how often capitalism forces us to put those things aside and center material objects as signs of success. But that's just wrong, right? We have to be happy and whole at the core. So what I want us to really think about is, how can we all be bridge builders? Like, we all have unique sets of talents, right? All of us have talents. How can we use those talents to uplift our young people and help them to be those next future leaders of our world? So the organization that I have the privilege to work for is called Usher's New Look. It's a nonprofit started by a famous singer, Usher Raymond IV. We're going into our 25th year of service in 2024, so very excited about that. But the focus of our work is really doing just what I talked about. It's helping to build passion-driven global leaders, okay? And we're very intentional in doing that. We want to think about, how do we help build happy, healthy human beings that can be contributors to society and also to provide for themselves and their families, okay? And our approach is using a 10-year continuum of programs. So we try to start with students before they enter high school to help them understand how do you navigate these spaces? What are some things you should be thinking about? What's a new look on your life journey? I consider myself a guide on the side, okay? And I love that term because we very much want to center the power of young people, okay? And we've got to work against the concept of ageism, where we think as adults we have all the answers, because the reality is that we don't. A lot of the most brilliant concepts come from young people. Innovation often comes from young people. Revolutions start with young people. So we have to figure out as adults, how do we support their growth and development in a happy and healthy way, in a holistic way? So our program helps them to think about how do you navigate high school, centered around 4 principles of leadership. They're talent, education, career, and service, okay? And each one has a unique meaning, a unique curriculum designed to power young people through that year of school and to really put them on a pathway to success, but really beginning with them doing some self-evaluation of who they are, identifying their passion, which we call a spark, and using that spark to power that journey, okay? We want people to live in alignment with what they're about so that they can feel good about their work, so they can be healthy contributors to society, not because someone said they should do something, but because it's what they really feel good about doing. So our program, we've got 4 programs, one called Powered by Service, which we use or we leverage the brain power of our older students to teach some of these concepts to younger students. We also have a program called the Leadership Academy, which works with high school students to help them figure out their journey, to think about how can education be a vehicle to bettering their lives. We want them to think about careers that align with who they are. But most importantly, the concept of service and servant leadership is where we put a lot of our effort. Again, we want them to think about how can they be beacons of hope? How can they be change makers? We've even made up a word called disruptivator. As you can see on my shirt, it's the Disruptivator Club. And our aim is really to build a community of disruptivators all around the world. We want to leverage the power of young people to help them be change makers and identify issues in their respective communities and come up with solutions, right? They have the power to do that, and we want them to speak across borders. I would love to have some Disruptivator clubs here and to have young people here to talk to students in the United States or in Canada or in the Dominican Republic or in India. Think about how the power of young people can help us to figure these things out, okay? Our last program is what we call Moguls in Training, mogul, right? It's a significant word here. And that's a program designed for post-secondary students to navigate those spaces and prepare themselves for employment. Okay, so as you can see, it's a process we're staying with students for about 10 years in total and really helping them to think about how they're going to be the future leaders of our world. So on that note, I want to give it back to Dr. Rashmi, or who am I passing it to? I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed empowering. So finally, we have Geshe. Of course, he will speak from the perspective of Buddhism.
Disadvantage of being the last speaker is all the good things are already said. But the advantage is that you do not have to speak much, of course. But then Dr. Rashmi is very clever. She made me the last speaker. And the title that she gave us also, Geshe says something on the Buddhist perspective, which is something like my field, so there's no way I can escape. So I'll try to do justice with the given time as much as possible, but you stop me if I'm staying more than the time. I'll try to speak in few lines. Number one, in relation to the Buddha's life story and then the Tibetan experience. If we relate to the Buddha's life story, of course, you all know that he was born as a prince and he had all the luxuries at his disposal, although he did not have an iPhone at that time. But he had basically all the luxuries at his disposal. And one of the seers at that time made a forecast by saying, by telling this to the king, that if you keep your prince with you, he will become a universal monarch. But if you let him follow the spiritual path, he will get completely enlightened, he will become a Buddha. So the king prepared to be the heir of his rule. So in order to make sure that he does not get enticed by the spiritual practice, he was more or less forbidden to go for any excursion outside the palace. And inside the palace, as I said, you have more or less everything. Beautiful, women singing, dancing, all the sumptuous, delicious food at your disposal. There's no ugly sight visible there. But Buddha as an enlightened person already, and he is, even if you see him from an ordinary perspective, he had this very special penetrative acumen. And he wondered, everything looks so good here, but what is behind this? What is behind this fence? So this was so moving to me when I listened to this story. We are living in a affluent material world today. So we need to ask this question, what is there behind this material affluence? Is this all the material marvels, the shiny gadgets? Is this all, or there's something behind this? So that was very relevant to me. And of course he ventured out, and then he saw unfortunately, all the ugly sides, aging, sickness, death, and so forth. And then he started asking all the questions, relevant questions. From where does aging come, sickness come, death come, suffering come, lack of harmony come? And when he investigated like this, he simplified it by saying that, I know people want happiness, people don't want suffering. Very simple. Happiness also comes from cause. Suffering also comes from cause. So if people really don't want suffering, why don't they find the cause and at least try to minimize it? If they want happiness, if they genuinely want happiness, why don't they find the cause and maximize it, at least? That was kind of the solution for all the riddles. If you spend a little bit more time and think about it, that was the solution. But the problem at that time and even today is, we have some glimpse of the causes of the happiness and suffering and so forth, but we really don't want to go into the depth, and more importantly, as you all mentioned, we don't want to implement, we don't want to practice. At the best, we reach at the level saying, this, I know the cause, I know, but I don't want to work, I know. That's the problem, you see. As you said, we need to practice. So that was the first part. So he found the causes for happiness, causes for suffering. Then he said, I need to just live this princely, luxurious life and go out into the nature. That was a big statement for me. Go out into the nature. Much of the problem that we are suffering today is we are not in contact with the nature. We are in constant contact with the artificial. That's the problem. So he went out into the nature, he meditated under the tree, he got enlightened under the tree. This is a beautiful statement. Then after he achieved that enlightenment, then the thing that he wanted to share, as I already mentioned, was finding the causes for happiness and suffering and work on that. That's it. So his spiritual journey clearly indicates that out of the two, the body and the mind is the ruler, mind is the forerunner. Unless you find a way and means to control and discipline the mind, these days I call the mind my boss, you see. And for your country you need a president. When you elect a president, a prime minister, the election must be careful so that you have a good president, good prime minister. But in the case of our mind, we don't care who is our leader. So one of the most important Buddhist practices is electing a good leader. That means a positive attitude. A mind with wisdom, mind with love, mind with compassion, and dethrone the negative leaders, ignorant, self-grasping, so forth. So to make the long story short, as Buddha clearly said, and in fact this very famous 8th century saint scholar, Indian saint scholar, Shantideva, he said, even though we want happiness, but because of ignorance, we destroy the cause of happiness as if it is our enemy. Even though we do not want suffering, we chase the causes of suffering as our friend. That's the problem. So therefore, the root cause is to find out the causes of all miseries, all problems, which is ignorance. Now this is very deep. Now when we talk about ignorance, ignorance is not just lack of knowledge. That is also there, but it's not just lack of knowledge. It is misconception of reality. And the misconceptions are so widespread and so thick. We have this tendency to see what is impermanent as permanent, what is suffering as happiness, what is selfless as having self, so on and so forth. There's the problem. So in short, what we need to do is to bridge the gap between appearance and reality. Today the world is running after appearances, and we have become a slave to the dictates of the 5 or 6 senses. We chase the sensual objects, whether it's a sound or a smell or a taste or a touch. We run after that. We become slave to this and never give a chance to the inner voice, to the mind. Recently I read somewhere else that you should be very nice to yourself, because at the end of the day, it is you with whom you have to spend the rest of your life. Such a beautiful statement, you see. And we never think about this. So therefore, the most important thing that is taught in Buddhism is, we talk about meditation, mindfulness, and so forth. So by these teachings, what the Buddha and other Buddhist teachers are saying is, you need to practice self-actualization. You need to You need to be mindful of what your body is saying, what your feeling is saying, what the rest of the phenomena is saying. For example, in the case of the body, normally our body, which is now scientifically proved also, the body has the capacity to give you the signals that things are not going very well. Be careful. But we don't pay attention to these signals. You don't become obese overnight. You don't become diabetic overnight. You get signals, and you don't pay attention to this physical signal, thinking that it's all right, it's all right. So therefore, in Tibetan, there is a saying which says, it is not good to make friendship with okay. It's okay, it's okay. A little bit of sweet, it's okay. Little bit of salt, it's okay. No, it's not okay. It is the last straw that broke the camel's back, you know that very well. So you keep on accumulating little and little and little, and finally you will collapse, you see. So therefore, this mindfulness practice is so important. Be mindfulness of your body, your feeling, whether feeling is pleasurable, unpleasurable, neutral, whatever. Then, much in advance, with this mindfulness and awareness, you change your lifestyle. That is what the teaching is saying. Change your lifestyle. And you should be cognizant of with what kind of person you are making friendship, with whom you are going, what kind of food you are taking, what kind of clothes you are wearing. So therefore, if you go to the Tibetan medical system, the first thing that is taught is, if you really want to have a good health, you need to first of all you need to be aware of the situation, the environment. For example, which season are you living right now? If it is winter season, you need to have a different lifestyle. If it is summer season, you have a different lifestyle. You see? So all this is like in harmony with the nature. So these are just indications. I don't have time to go into the depth. Indications. The last indication that I'm going to give is these days I've always been repeatedly saying that the problem with us today, the major problem with us today is we are unable to live in harmony with the nature. We don't try to understand the length and breadth of the nature. Now when I say nature, I'm talking about a huge topic, which may be very confusing. So let me give you one example, nature, understanding nature. For example, death is a nature, it's natural. Now if you become cognizant of one fact like the death, your whole life will change, provided if you pay proper attention and practice it. That's why when the Buddha got enlightened, after he got enlightened, he was requested to share his wisdom. He said, nobody will understand it. Don't push me to give this teaching, because nobody will understand it. So let me do my meditation in the forest. Then after repeated request by human beings and celestial beings, when finally he gave the teaching, he gave this teaching, the famous teaching called the Four Noble Truth, out of which the first teaching was on the truth of the suffering. When he was giving this teaching on the truth of the suffering, the first teaching that he was giving was on impermanence, including death. The reason he gave this teaching is the beginning of his teaching is, unless you have a clear understanding of your fragile, transient, impermanent nature, you will never make a move. You will forever plan to destroy the planet, build house, swimming pools, buy cars. From where these swimming pools, cars, and Mercedes and all these things, from where are they coming? From the nature. Now what is nature? Forest, mineral resources, and things like that. So they are nature. When you talk about mineral resources and so forth, they are physical realities. Anything that is physical has, by definition, limitation. Now look at the stupidity. We are thinking about making unlimited progress. How can you make unlimited progress from limited resources? Now we are already seeing the limitation of the nature, the destruction that we have done. Right? So therefore you see pollution everywhere, air pollution, water pollution, then of course mental pollution. Really? So I mean, this is not a subject that we can just avoid and pay, not to pay attention. So therefore the problem, what the Buddha was saying, what the Buddhist teaching was saying, is the problem with us human beings is we don't see what we should be seeing, but we keep on seeing what we want to see. We don't do what we should be doing, but keep on doing what we want to do. Be it your personal health, be it for the goodness of the society. So that is the problem. That's the problem. So therefore, it is really now the almost like the last point, and I consider this little bit like bombshell. Because just as the Buddha had given the teaching, unless we say something powerful, I think people don't move. So therefore, these days, in all my talks, I'm saying we are impermanent, we are fragile, we are going to die. Everybody says, yes, I'm going to die. Then I tell them, look, from today, counting from today, in the next 100 years, all these 8 billion people that we have are all dead. Not necessarily through nuclear bomb, even otherwise, more or less. All this 800 billion human beings are dead after 100 years counting from today. Why I'm saying this? Why the Buddha said so? The Buddha said so. Why I'm saying this is because if you develop such a clear, precise understanding, then you need to think, okay, if this is my last day today, what should I be doing? That's what I'm saying. If this is my last day, shall I engage in corruption? This is the last chance, I will engage in bribe and corruption. Huh? Automatically, if you know that today is your last day, or if you're somebody who is convinced that you will die after 5 years, your life will change. You will stop doing all these nonsensical things, you see. So that's the problem. So unless we have a precise understanding of the way things are, especially with our life, we are not going to make a move. So we need to tell the bitter truth. In Hindi, bolte na karwa sach. We need to tell the bitter truth. I think that is extremely important. Then since I'm saying this from the Buddhist perspective, how the Buddhist teachings are benefiting those who practice it. Let us take the example of the Tibetans. In the past Tibet, we hardly had any technological material development. We are living with the nature. 6 billion or so human beings living in a geographical size bigger than the whole Western Europe. And we are more or less in harmony with the nature. I'm not saying Tibet is Shangri-La, everything is perfect. I'm not saying that. People have written things like that, but I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, because of the Buddhist practice, there was harmony. There was hardly any famine. There was hardly any beggar. If they are beggars, we can't call them beggars because they can go anywhere and eat food, free food, anywhere. No problem. Hardly any disease. Especially the modern disease unknown. Then look at the water. Water means drinkable. In Tibet, water means drinkable, not like today. Today you check in a 5-star hotel. I did this one time. I checked in a 5-star hotel and then I asked one of the caretaker, can I drink from the tap? That person said, maybe. Not so sure. See, even a 5-star hotel, imagine. So now still we call ourselves intelligent human beings. Where is our intelligence? My dear friend, tell me, where is our intelligence? So what I'm really saying is we need to provoke people and really discover the humanity, the lost humanity in us. The special quality with human beings is we have this amazing human intelligence and this amazing language. And this amazing language is for dialogue and discussion, for solving any problem. Tigers can't do this. Snakes can't do this. So we must use this language for health, for happiness, for harmony. Then special intelligence. If you don't use this intelligence, but act like other animals, eating food, having sex, that's all, then what is the use of having this big brain? You see? So we need to really I'm glad that today I found you, as my kindred soul. You see? So I'm just talking and talking, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe. So it seems evidently we have a lot more to exchange and hear. So for the next 10 minutes, the panelists will engage in further deliberations amongst yourself, and then we will open to the floor.
Yeah, let us do it like this. We can ask questions to ourselves and also invite questions from the floor also, because we have only 20 minutes or so.
To the
Yeah.
floor.
Tesh Tilak, and my name is Penpa Sring. Penpa means literally means Saturday. I was born on Saturday, so I have finished my master's in psychology from Delhi University. So being a psychologist, budding psychologist, it is very honored to meet Dr. Akbar, who is the founding member of APA. We read a lot about the APA, but today is the fortunate to meet some APA member over here. So now coming to the question, since you mentioned about lived experience, we also have a lived experience, you also share about the lived experience. Through your lived experience, there is a certain kind of traumas that you have faced during your growth of the childhood. So since all the Tibetans also have a lived experience, we lost our nations. Our grandparents went to the lived experience. Then our fathers went to the lived experience. Today we are also going to the lived experience. So now, based on your topic, the main task is so we can counter the lived experience, if you face some challenge, people who go through alcoholics. So their main task is not to fall their children into the life of addiction. So just in Tibetan community, there are so many lived experience. Some grandfathers or fathers, due to focusing on political activity, they are not able to give much love to their parents or children. So how we counter that to provide a safe environment to the children? So that is one question for Dr. Akbar. And second question for Dr. Jaipal. You talk about mainly about the side effect of internet addiction. So in Tibetan community, recently I noticed for the last 1 or 2 years, they provide the cell phone to the children to, I think it is a kind of an easy job. They don't want to spend much time with them, but nobody wants to do the difficult job. So but you didn't talk much about how to counter that. You mostly share about the demerits. So what's your opinion on it? Like how to provide some intervention? Like what's your research point of view? And for the Geshe, I think Geshe, we usually have lots of questions, so maybe. And for the Geoff, sorry for the pronunciation, maybe I can write some email to you in the future. Thank you.
Geoff was good. That was good.
Well, thank you for that question. One of the things that I found in my research and in my studies is that intergenerational trauma is something that we do pass down. And in fact, there's a whole new body of research that's called epigenetics. And what epigenetics does is that it looks at the molecular level, our DNA, and the prototype of different pieces of our DNA and the different things that are passed down. That's why if you ever go to see a medical professional, you might have to fill out a questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, it asks you questions like who in your family had diabetes or high blood pressure or cancer or a bunch of other things. And one of the things that we want to see if there's a family history of disease. But guess what's never in those questionnaires? Is there a family history of trauma? And what we do understand is that trauma is such an incredible silent disease, is that it will impact the body and it will eat it like a silent cancer. And what we also understand about trauma is that it is contagious, just like COVID, and we pass it to one another consistently. We also understand about trauma is that it, as an adult, your adult trauma will override the nervous system of a child, override it, and you will cause a traumatic experience unknowingly to your children. So it's so important that we have awareness about this because when we don't understand the impact of intergenerational trauma and how it's passed down, guess what we're going to do? We're going to continue to pass it down. And so to your question, well, you know, the Tibetan people have been through an incredible amount of collective trauma. And one of the things that you have to recognize, not just as a collective people, but as individuals, is how do we begin our healing path? And that comes in a multitude of different ways. You know, I didn't think I would come today and receive such an incredible gift as what Geshe Lhakdor gave today. But, you know, in listening to the teachings and in connecting with the words that he was saying, there were pieces of me that were healed just sitting here. And it's so important to take those opportunities to internalize those kinds of words and to put it into practice in your life, and to recognize that you can be the person that does not continue to pass down the trauma to your children. And a lot of that has to do with talking to our kids and explaining to them what happened and explaining the family history and also supporting them in a different type of environment so that they can grow to be healthy, you know, children, and putting them in different programs that help to support development in a way that's different. So those are the kinds of things that I would say. I think, you know, I was very impressed by the C learning curriculum that His Holiness has put together, because I think that it is a very incredibly thoughtful way of bridging Buddhist tradition and the importance of mental health. Because, you know, as Geshe said so importantly, if our mind is polluted, our entire body is polluted, our entire communities are polluted, and we're not going to be able to heal in the way that we need to. So we can begin that today, and you begin that by making a choice and a decision that we are no longer going to continue to pass these things down.
Thanks. And regarding your question about internet addiction, I was thinking there are two ways to look at it. One, as you're saying, is the parents feel like they give the children the cell phone right from the start because they don't have the time, or it's much easier, and so on. And the child also has, the tendency is to place the responsibility on the child or the parent to control this, right? And the way to handle it at the individual level is, yes, you train counselors and psychologists, you provide them in these communities so you can send your children to the counselor, and they can help them control their addiction or get over it. That's the sort of popular way they do it in developed countries. So the focus is on the individual and how to help the individual. And that's also, it's important. And in India, what we need, and in the Tibetan community, what we need is, if you want to do it that way, which is a part of it, then you have to invest in capacity building for counselors. You have to invest in educating the parents and the whole community about what the problems of cyber addiction, that this is happening, how do you counter it? There are many interventions you can use, But the thing is, you have to invest in capacity building and laying down mental health systems that can address this, and among other things, which is what I was trying to do in Sikkim. We were trying to lay down mental health systems that can address this. And a lot of it has to do with a shortage of mental health professionals who can deal with it. But on the other hand, the other issue is that the overall environment that this globalized economy is creating is about, as Geshe was saying, the senses. It's advertising, it's marketing, it's trying to get people, they entice you grip the senses. You take this, people get involved in their senses through all the glitzy consumer products or the lifestyle, whatever it is. Your senses are being constantly stimulated in this kind of global consumer economy, this kind of economy that focuses on the marketplace and on getting people to buy, to consume material goods. So that is so what happens with the children is that they get, or any adult, you get addicted because your senses are hooked. And they build these algorithms and these advertising algorithms purposely to hook you. They're using psychological techniques like, how to get people engaged, and then how do you get them hooked. So this I think requires a more systemic approach as well, where again the current global or the idea of the economic system as being a market economy, a free market economy where everyone has to compete with everyone to sell more, buy more, convince your consumers that you have to buy more. This is what's creating the problems also on social media with these children. So this is a huge topic, but I think what you're saying, what you're asking is that I feel this problem has to be addressed at both levels, at the individual level, but also at the systems level, at the economic level, at the policy level, where how long are we going to go on having economic systems that are really creating more and more problems, psychological problems, mental problems. As Geshe was saying, the senses are pulling us away. If you're sort of stimulating the senses, you're being taken away from your inner self. You're no longer, most people are not even connected in any way to their inner self or their heart. It's all the senses. They're glued to the screen or whatever it is. So this is a real problem, and I feel like this is unsustainable. This kind of economic system is unsustainable, and that this is a canary in the tunnel. If you're getting youth now doing all this, getting addicted, increasing anxiety and depression, there's something really wrong with the system as well. So we have to address at both levels. Because just doing it at the individual level while you continue with the economic system the way it is, will be more work for the psychologists, that's great, but you're going to keep creating generations of sick children. So that's my response.
Say something real quick. I have to say this joke. So we went for a nature walk, and Rashmi probably could have answered this in 30 seconds because she, when we went for the nature walk this morning, there was a restaurant that said...
You just stole my thunder.
I took it. Sorry. I'm going to say it anyway. Rashmi said, oh, Maysa, take a look. And Geoff, take a look at this sign. It says, no Wi-Fi, talk to each other. That's it.
That's a great restaurant. Go eat there.
I'm sorry, we spend too much time together. Maybe we start to think alike.
Yeah, I think that it's largely about centering humanity in our connections, right? And thinking about human connection. Dr. Akbar stole my quote. But it's such a pertinent and important concept, right? Is to spend time with people, to emphasize the art of conversation. So, one of the things I notice often is that our social interactions are really changing, right? We can be in community spaces and see people on phones, but not talking to each other. So those are some things we have to think about, like how do we reframe how we're interacting with one another, and what is the net effect of those changes. I also want to lift up the concept of a two-generation approach, right? That's a great question, thinking about lived experience and what impact it has. Quite often, I don't think we understand or consider the relationship between parents, caregivers, and young people and education. So from a schooling perspective, quite often, as adults and parents, we think we just take kids to school, you drop them off, they learn, and then, they become brilliant and take over the world. But we don't think about the responsibility, that shared responsibility between those who are caring for children and those who are educating, right? It needs to be a partnership. So as we're thinking about how do we, get past the trauma that we've experienced, we have to think about what dialogue looks like and how do we give each other the necessary tools to work through it in a healthy manner. My last piece was, we need to bring youth into more of these conversations, right? We talk a lot about what's best for young people, right? But we don't have young people in these rooms. So how do we know? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But you get my point. We need to really younger people. Yes, I'm sorry. We need to really center youth voice, right? And I thank the young people that are here today for being here, right? You all are the change makers that are going to make the difference.
And don't forget, I'm 70 years young. So I want to say 2-3 lines on this, the words that you've all used: connection, addiction, and habit. In Buddhism, when we talk about meditation, it is basically forming positive habit for which you need to do repeatedly. That's meditation. So if you do that, you form a very healthy connection. The same thing is said in the neuroscience, because when the brains start communicating to each other, the question is what kind of communication they are having, positive communication or negative communication. If you continue to make the negative communication, you get addicted to it. And if you make the positive connection, you get habituated with the positive things, and that is how you flourish. So therefore, in Buddhism, the reason for meditation is clearly said by one teacher who said, you are controlled by your mind. Your mind is predominantly controlled by unhealthy thoughts. Because of that, sufferings arise. Now it is high time you get habituated with the positive things if you want happiness. So there's something that I want to mention, yeah. Can I have maybe one question, then stop if there is any burning question. Burning question, please.
My pages are burning. Greetings, everyone. So my question, any of you can answer, specifically Dr. Maysa, if you can, as being a healer. So we, as a Tibetan, and being a millennial kid, I see, since coming into exile, I'm brought up and grown up in exile in India itself. I've seen lots of a generation gap between our parents and our grandparents and us, and the Generation Zs as well. So the millennial kid, us and our parents, like bringing the positive psychology, according to Maslow hierarchy, the basic needs, which are like the food, shelters, and physiological needs, are like in scarcity when our parents came to exile. So they started with the road construction and everything to bring livelihood together. So they don't have a time to think about the self-actualization, love, and other things. And right now, we're seeing lots of changes since it's been like more than 50 years in exile. And our focus is shifting gradually to our like the inner growth and mental health status, and we are saying there are more cases of Tibetan youngsters with mental health and mental issues, but earlier we don't have that like focus in that space and time to think about the mental health state, because we were so busy looking for our survival and our needs, physiological needs. But so we don't give focus on that in earlier time. But right now, since we do have a space and time for that, we look for it, and then we started to focus more, and we see the changes and give all the datas and everything that we are in, like this much of person is suffering from this mental state. And but what my question is, between that generational gap, we're also seeing lots of unhealed trauma passed within this cycle. And Uncle Nikita, who is from Nagaland, he although he didn't say it by himself, but he passed me an insightful quote which says, "Heart not transformed is transferred." And it's really, and this is very insightful that I really wish to share with everyone in this hall. But how can we close that generation gap in between to break that cycle? Because it's being passed on knowingly and unknowingly. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. You know, in my book, the first quote that I wrote as soon as you open the book is a famous quote by Marcus Garvey, which says, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds," right? And I think that a lot of times we don't understand the power of that. Instead, we focus on the things that we need to accomplish, and we focus on the pieces of survival that you talked about, because our survival instinct is consistently activated, right? And neurobiologically, what that does to our bodies is that we're constantly producing a chemical called cortisol. And when our cortisol levels are high, our brain is overactivated constantly. It believes that it's in danger all of the time. When cortisol, it's only supposed to be activated when you are actually in danger, because it tells you to do one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. And if you freeze, that's bad, because then something's going to happen to you, you know? So what's important is, as we are thinking about and having these discussions and bringing greater awareness, the millennial population, our Gen Zers, they're saying, hey, I don't know that I want to continue to exist in this lifetime living life in spite of my trauma. How about if we considered that in this lifetime, I can become a whole healed person and live life because I stand in my wholeness, right? And, the generations that came before, that wasn't an option. Talking about wholeness and being your full self and, authentically having these kinds of discussions wasn't something that was afforded, nor did we understand what those conversations look like. Now we have elevated and amplified the discussion around mental health. Now mental health is not just for sick, crazy people. Now mental health is something that everyone should have as their civil right. It should be your civil right to be a mentally healthy person, right? And so all of those things the generations before didn't have and didn't understand, and you can only give what you have. And so if you're broken, you're going to give brokenness. If you're healthy, you're going to give health. If you're happy, you're going to give joy. And so what we start to see is that as this awareness has increased, our younger population has been very vocal about making sure that they're seeking that out. And I learn from young people every single day. First of all, y'all keep me young, because if the terminology alone I have to keep up with. But number two, it's a call to action for me to say, I must deliver for you in order to make sure that you stand in your truth and in your fullness, because I have to depend on you for the future, right? And so I want every young person here, because there's a lot. I know everyone raised their hand when Geoff was talking about young people, to know that you have a mission, that you have the capacity to continue to change the world. Do not give up on your passion. Know that you are standing in your truth, and believe that you will change the world in one way or another to be better for future generations, not just for you or your children and their children. And so, yes, you have gone through a lot, and you have an incredible history that really, really impressed me when I was going through the museum, and I've heard from many people here. But you also have an incredible resilience. And that resilience can be passed down just the same way that trauma can be passed down, and that's why I'm fascinated by it. So let's stand in that truth, and let's make sure that we are contagious in that way, not just contagious in passing down our trauma. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this very lively and engaging discussion. So Geshe will present the auspicious scarf and gifts to the panelists.
Before I do that, let me cite one quotation, Buddhist quotation, which says, there is nobody who will catch hold of your hand and throw you into heaven. There is nobody who will catch hold of your leg and drag you into hell. Your happiness, your suffering is in your hand. Do not cheat yourself. Thank you. Thank you.